Star Trek is often described as utopian, but we could also call it post-post-apocalyptic.
How about war? Disease, hunger. Pretty much wiped them out in less than 2 generations.
While the timeline and details of the eugenics wars and the nuclear apocalypse shift with the narrative over the decades, Trek assumes a massive catastrophic event separating that world from ours.
Mid-21st century. The post-atomic horror.
And this is interesting not only in terms of Trek's lore, but in context of the real world it reflects and how it's changed over the course of 6 decades. From the original series premiere in 1966 through the movies of '79 and the '80s, the spin-off series through the '90s, Star Trek has been linear, always moving into its own future, until Enterprise went back to the early days of Starfleet and the birth of the Federation, to the very dawn of the time when humanity was transforming from a bunch of post-apocalyptic tribes into an interstellar civilization. In Trek lore, it's a frontier period, a time of youthful exploration and optimism, of stepping into a wider world full of wonders and possibilities. But Enterprise premiered in September of 2001. Not a time of unbounded optimism among its largely American audience. Culturally, we were on a downslope. We didn't really have a story to get behind. Amidst the turmoil of the '60s, Star Trek was a new story showing an optimistic vision of the future. In the aughts, well, we got reboots of old stories, Enterprise being but one example. The Federation is an idealized projection of American liberalism, embracing the progressive view of history, the idea that we're moving forward to ever better things. Technology solves problems, and we'll become more egalitarian and enlightened as we advance. But the backstory quietly suggests that you can't get there from here. And by the time Enterprise was on the air, that progressive idea had largely withered and the quiet part was starting to feel a lot louder. Even though the show clung to that original sense of wonder and progress, it was telling stories in a time that didn't really believe in those things. It struggled to find its footing in the first 2 seasons. It was trying to be old Trek. Season 3 was more in tune with the zeitgeist, with a full season arc revolving around a surprise attack on Earth and the mission to find those responsible. Enterprise had to be a bridge, not just between the atomic wasteland and utopian vision of the original series, but between the optimism of the vision portrayed in the mid-20th century and the cultural stagnation of the early 21st. And this is why, for me at least, Enterprise is both the most underrated and underdeveloped iteration of Star Trek. It's set in that transitional period, the early days of humanity becoming a different kind of civilization, still emerging from the shadow of cataclysm, recovering from vast depopulation, widespread hunger and war, now united Earth as sort of an indulged vassal of a paternalist Vulcan civilization.
I'm sure Ambassador Saval will understand.
A world starting to chafe a little under the benign guidance of its benefactor.
You'll be apprised of all pertinent information.
In that sense, Enterprise isn't just about Captain Archer taking humanity out into a wider universe. It's about humanity taking that final step away from our past as a bunch of warring tribes confined to one planet and into a future of enlightenment and exploration, or empire and administration, depending on which iteration of Trek is your baseline. But the thing to keep in mind here is that Earth is still in a traumatized state. Think Germany or Japan in the first generation after World War II. There is a hard disconnect between the cultural assumptions and political systems of the past and the new conditions under the guiding hand of a foreign power. There's no canon numbers on Earth's population at the time of Enterprise, and after spending some time on Memory Alpha, it's more contradictory than I remembered from a lifetime of Trek watching. But I think it's reasonable to estimate the Earth's population as being in the 3 to 4 billion range at the top end, given the eugenics wars from 1992 to 96, then World War III, and still being in a post-atomic horror in 2079. There's just too much uncertainty in canon to really lock it down.
I'm not a member of the Eastern Coalition.
Just going by the film, we don't know if he means Eastern as in China or as in New England, only that somebody bombs Montana periodically. And this is all still in living memory when Jonathan Archer wants to take his ship out and the Vulcans are telling him, slow your roll.
Ambassador Saval thinks it would be best if we push off your launch until we've cleared this up.
I mean, Earth has one ship. I know there are freighters making long-duration runs at Warp 1 or 2, but the Warp 5 NX-01 is mankind's one real starship at this point. The whole mission has this subtext of trying to reboot the failed progressive model of history that shattered with the wars. It's the decisive moment that will determine whether humanity reimagines itself and reclaims the idea of progress, or settles into having ended war and poverty and sit quietly in the shadow of the Vulcans. At best stagnate under benevolent colonialism, at worst lose a vital part of a collective human soul and spoil into something fetid. And the humans in Enterprise are more like us than they are like the smugly enlightened Starfleet officers of Picard's era. They do impose their morality on others.
We'll take him back home, alive.
This is no time to be imposing your ethical beliefs.
They have vehement, violent political disputes, sometimes a xenophobic streak.
That child is a crossbreed freak.
And they quickly turn to force to get what they need when kind words and high ideals fail.
What you can't have, you take by force. You're stranding us 3 years from home.
And yet, they can be recklessly forthright when something gets their ire up. They have one ally, the Vulcans, and Archer burns them by revealing their spy operation to the Andorians. These humans are violent, impulsive, and illogical.
Well, you never did care for the way we smell. At least you won't have to put up with that anymore.
And they're risking it all on one ship. If the Enterprise gets destroyed or starts a war out there, that might be the end of it. To boldly go indeed. So, detour. Let's talk about Klingons for a bit. They've become these weird samurai space orcs going on about honor while they stab each other. The core, settled image of Klingons really comes from Star Trek III. Krug seems more like a privateer than a naval captain. He seems to be operating on his own initiative more than as part of an organized fleet. Even the attempts in Next Generation and Deep Space Nine to walk that back leave them as a remarkably simplistic and socially primitive society. Which is to be expected. They started out as TV villains, bad guy of the week. Original series Klingons were combative and blended aspects of Eastern hordes from the Soviets to the Mongols, but they were an organized military. They engaged in organized campaigns. They used proxies, as in a private little war. They had deep cover intelligence operatives, as shown in The Trouble with Tribbles. The Klingons were a civilization that venerated its warriors rather than a civilization of warriors. Enterprise played with this some, for example in the episode Judgment.
You didn't believe all Klingons were soldiers.
I guess I did.
Klingons, too, have their cultural funk, it seems. Again, nature of the medium. Let's step to a different medium and back a few decades to an earlier point in the evolution of Trek. The Final Reflection, written by John Ford, was published in 1984, the same year that Star Trek III cemented the definitive look of the Klingons. The book is non-canon, but nevertheless has been influential in many ways on how the Klingons have been given more depth through Next Gen onward. And Final Reflection also shows us a more balanced view of the Klingons. They have a functioning society with scientists and administrators as well as warriors. There are Klingon actors, young children trained for war, but they also read adventure stories and enjoy schlocky teleplays. Instead of slobbering blood wine and shouting, they have nuanced conversations over glasses of brandy. These Klingons are warlike, but they aren't obsessed with fighting for its own sake. Rather, their militarism is an expression of a broader multi-domain aggressiveness. They're vibrant and proud. These Klingons are in an expansionist phase, both in territorial and cultural terms. And through that mindset, they perceive something crucial about the civilizations around them. There are strong civilizations like the Romulans or the Federation, humans and Vulcans specifically. And there are Kuve, contemptible peoples fit only to be conquered. With that as background, a Klingon envoy to Earth meets with a wealthy tycoon. This was written before that whole "we don't use money" thing got dropped into the lore without any thought as to how it works. And this man, Maxwell Grandison III, is the leader of the Back to Earth movement that wants to give up on all this expensive and dangerous colonization of other worlds. There are some parallels with the Terra Prime faction in Enterprise, though that one goes a lot more supervillain.
In 2 hours, I'm going to fire a Verteron beam directly at Starfleet Command.
Underlying both cases is the idea that Earth is a paradise for humanity, and humanity should enjoy it. Grandison tries to explain this to the Klingons, to show them that there's no need for war between their two peoples because we only need Earth. The Klingon response is worth thinking on. We have a word, Komerex. Your translator has probably told you it means empire, but what it truly means is the structure that grows. It has an opposite, Khesterex, the structure that dies. We are taught, by those you wish to receive your story, that there are no other cultures than these, and in my years as a captain I have seen nothing to indicate that my teaching was wrong. There are only empires and Kuve. Kren saw Grandison's long jaw go slack. He knew how the human's machine had translated the last word. And this is the change you say you wish to make in yourselves. And this speaks to the core story of Enterprise. At the start of the series, humanity has solved many of its problems. Earth is a paradise, but humanity is also leaning toward the Khesterex side of the scale, vassal to the Vulcans, a junior ally at best. The Starship Enterprise is a manifestation of that conscious decision not to sink into comfortable dependence. This isn't the end of the human story, and they lived boringly ever after. It's the beginning, to boldly go forth, and through the course of this journey, all the struggles and setbacks, humanity learns to stand on a much larger stage, becomes the senior partner in a powerful alliance that would have been impossible without this confident, arrogant even newcomer jumping into the middle of affairs like they belonged at the center of things. In some ways, it's an American story, both in terms of the frontier mythos and the young power supplanting its parent as the hegemon, like the US and UK. But it's also a more universal human story about how cultures rise and fall. At the start, the Vulcans are powerful but stagnant, too rigid to adapt and too conservative to really understand anything new, while humanity is boundlessly confident yet staggeringly ignorant. By the end, the two have moderated each other and become the closest of allies. And it's a story about finding that balance between realistically assessing your limitations, identifying what you don't know and acquiring that knowledge, but also having the confidence and the sense of self-worth to pursue greatness. It's a message for individuals and entire cultures, because today we're wobbling on the edge of going full Khesterex. I've already touched on the state of modern pop culture like a crotchety old man, but it's in politics where it's most telling. Obviously, there's Make America Great Again, by definition looking backward to a better time, trying to recreate an idea of what was more than going forward to something new. But it resonates. They win elections and Trump rallies draw passionate crowds because it's a better story than the other side is offering. The self-described progressives today have become synonymous with an ossified status quo that offers nothing but the same failed answers, the same tired tropes. Grievances might stir up a crowd, but gripes alone don't inspire people to greatness. And until we can do better than a choice between nostalgia or doubling down on mediocrity, we won't have that rebirth and rise to greatness that is at the heart of Star Trek. I still think we can get to a better future without a catastrophic hard reset. But we can't do it with Khest thinking. We need a new idea, a new motivating myth. I think we're in the process of discovering what it is, but until we do, yeah, Jo Yichu.